Welcome to part 7. So far in this Recommission and Ride project, we've taken this bike apart to assess for wear and damage. We've also cleaned up the engine and a lot of the parts. The cylinder head's been refurbished, we've overhauled the disc brakes and have started building the bike back up. Our goal today is to get the engine built up as much as we can. Thanks for joining us. Let's get started.
Since last time, I've moved on a little bit with it for you. As you can see, it's quite shiny. So we've polished the cases up, but the first thing I've done was the crankcase strainer plate, put that back on, 2 new gaskets made up for that, then we put the pipes on. So you've got the header pipes on, because it took a bit of time to actually get them all they're all in sections, as you know. They've got a splitter pipe. We made sure everything was all pushed up nice and all seals up nicely on the ports. So the head went on, pipes went on. The head, actually, all we've done so far is just put the pushrod tubes in, put the seals in the bottom. So we're ready now to clean up the rocker boxes and install those in the pushrods, and we can get the head torqued down and get compression. But yeah, so far it's looking quite tidy. When we were taking it apart, I did show you the rocker box covers, and there were strike marks and they were cracked and they were filled with silicone. So what we've managed to get hold of is some billet ones. They're made out of one solid piece of aluminium and machined out. And when they come in the packet, they're marked up as inlet and exhaust. Just reference for anyone, get your felt pen and mark it up as soon as you take it out of the packet, because these are both different. So the rocker boxes themselves, we won't take the spindles out, we're just going to check them all over. We'll take out the inspection covers. They're on there, so when you install the push rods, you can line up on the cup and on the ball. Now, you have to make sure one thing, in these rockers, you see here, you see that swivels, and it's like a ball bearing with a flat side. You have to make sure that is flat on the outside, because that's where the feeler gauge will go through. So it rotates, but you just make sure they're set up on the flat side down. We've got our rocker feed. We'll change these lines probably. We'll just check what these rubbers are like. And here is our other bits. We've got our toolbox rubbers. We've got our seal kit for our master cylinder. We've got our bleed screw nipple covers now, new taps, and the pilot bulb. So we've got, and a cable. There's a cable now for the throttle. We've got quite a few bits to actually go on with today. And hopefully we'll have this done, and we can actually then check the compression, and that'll be the main part of the engine done. Then later on, next episode maybe, carb bank, sort that lot out. When you come to take these covers out, as with any inspection cover, what I've got here is a Hagen shock adjuster. It's the right thickness. If you use a big screwdriver, it's fine, but you want a wide blade. That's why they get a bit chewed. We'll clean these up before we put them back in. If ever you're running a gasket off of a knife, just make sure you don't gouge into the aluminium. Just be careful with the knife. It does help, it gets underneath that gasket, but don't have the blade down, just skim over the top if you can. Don't want a too sharp a blade, never use a razor blade either. What we're going to use now, because it's a little bit tricky getting in between the fins, going to use a copper brush. Just got to be careful you don't get this inside your rocker box area, because the bristles could break off, but this will probably be the easiest way, because I can't really get down into the fins really. Okay, what we're going to do is just go on the block with the rocker boxes like we have done with all the other bits, and just make sure it's clean. There's no point in doing it kerosene and doing this afterwards, so we'll do it in one go. Just wipe it over a bit of paper as we have before, just check and see what it looks like. You can see the areas where we have good contact on the paper, and here it's slightly corroded, but I don't think we're going to change that. We'll just give it a little bit more of a going over. A little bit of damage there. And we look for cracks, and hopefully we don't see any cracks, but I think we're just carrying on just a bit more with that and it'll be fine. I'm probably going to go sideways with it now. Get your hand nice and flat on it, try and get even pressure. Someone mentioned in one of the comments about this block. I was lucky enough, an old boy that used to work in the RAF, is an engineer, he gave it to me, so I don't really know its origin, but I should imagine it come from a tool maker maybe originally. Maybe it was part of the RAF in the overhauling of engines and such like. Wartime this would have been. So yeah, useful bit of kit really. I think a lot of these get misused, they get beaten up, they get hit with a hammer for doing things. Don't use it for that, don't use it like an anvil. But it's a nice block, it's ideal for this sort of thing. And all I ever do to it after I've used it is just wipe it down and coat it with some WD-40, and it won't go rusty. Okay, so if you haven't got a block, what you can use is a piece of plate glass. And what I would say, if you get a piece of plate glass, put a towel or something on the bench, or make sure you can't be swiping this across and it's only the glass go on the floor. But if you put something on the bench, bit of cloth, whatever, it should stop that from happening. But in the past they used plate glass with grinding paste. Don't do that now. It'd be ideal to use it like this. Get your wet and dry 220, whatever, or even fine if you want to. Put that on your glass and do it the same as me. And I think if you just spray underneath like I've done, within a second or two, it won't move. It will grip. Like now, I'm not holding the paper at all. Okay, you can see you've actually got rid of all those marks now. Now, this is a lot better now for when you put your gasket on. You're going to get a better seal, better contact. Everything's going to be better about it, really. Now, if we go back to the other one, we're just going to put this back on the block because there's a couple of areas here. Well, we might get this out. Just give that a little bit more, because that was like that just now. We managed to finish that off quite nicely. There's a bit of a dink here. Anything like that can be bad for a gasket. It can be an area where oil can get the other side of the gasket and be a bit of a leak. Although there's nothing coming to the outside the case, it isn't very good. So we just see if we can clean that up a little bit. It's not a bad idea to move it around sometimes if it's an area where it's not coming out. If you keep moving the item you're doing around, there's probably more chance it will come out. Okay, as we've got the kerosene cleaner on the go, the carb bank, we may not get around to doing this today, but we're just going to give these carbs a bit of a clean up, just free everything up really, so they've all got to come apart. With these rockers, they have these little, like a ball bearing, with a flat side on it. Just be very careful when you're blowing out, they don't pop out. They shouldn't, but this one has. We just wipe round here now with brake cleaner because we're going to coat this with well seal. Okay, so yeah, we just had someone just turn up on a Triumph, a 500 Triumph. Nigel, he's got an ex-police bike, a P500 Triumph. Now, he bought this bike from somebody and it's been around the different specialists, and he's had an ongoing problem where it wouldn't run properly. Basically, the carburation wasn't right, and the pushrod tube seals were leaking, similar to these. So the neoprene seals needed replacing. But because we had the head off, we just dropped the valves out. Now, somehow, he'd been running the bike on choke a lot of the time. He didn't really understand position. He'd only ever ridden modern bikes before, so it's a bit of a learning curve to getting used to riding a British bike and how you set it up and what the levers do. Modern bike, you know, a lot of the time there isn't a choke now, it's fuel injection, turn the key, hit the button, off you go. Old bikes, you've got advanced levers, retard, choke, and all those sort of things. But on that Triumph, yeah, it's just a choke lever. So you tickle the carburetor and put on the choke. So it's getting used to the actual function of the levers and how you set the bike up and before you start it. So getting back to what we found wrong, the carburetor wasn't set up right. Pilot screw had been adjusted and the needle position was wrong. The timing wasn't correct, and we gave it an oil change and we put some decent tyres on there for him. And we just got the bike so it would start easily. And I gave him a bit of help with, like, this is how you start it, to give it a chance to warm up and just give him the confidence. Now, I think a lot of times with bikes, people going to old British bikes, classic bikes, they haven't had any time on anything else before that's old, and it's a bit of a learning curve. They're not easy always, but the older ones are even harder. It's the flat tankers with oil pump they have to adjust on the move and all those sort of things. Unless you know what you're doing, you can very easily seize those bikes up. So yeah, you need to do a little bit of research, like I say, before you buy one of these old machines, whether it's going to be for you or not. But yeah, he's happy with the bike now, and it runs really nice and sweet, and he's happy, and he's out now for a ride on it. So happy days. I think I've mentioned before about when you put wheel seal on, it's most important not to put too much on. And the fact is, if you have got a mascara brush, you can apply it and an even coat. You can put it on, spread it around. You can't do that with your fingers. But when you come to apply your wheel seal, whatever you want to use, just make sure with your gasket, first of all, where it sits, what you need to coat. Because there's no point coating areas where you don't need it. It's like on here, we need to go around here, but we don't need to go around that part of it. So we just don't do these two sections. Yeah, we just check the cut for signs of cracking. You might get a slight bit of wear because the actual push rod will locate onto the ball of the rocker inside, so it should be okay, but we just make sure there's no little bits of metal missing or cracks down the side. I always put just a little bit of grease in the cup of the push rod, just a little bit, so it's got a bit of lube when it goes onto the bottom. Don't want too much in there. Keep it in place as well. Okay, so when we put the push rod down in the tube, just make sure you're locating onto the camshaft followers. So you're just going to turn this over and just make sure all the push rods move up and down. What we'll try and do is we make sure that these are down, because you've got both one cylinder is in both tubes here, so you've got two inlets in one tube and two exhausts, so it's the centre and the right hand cylinder. So we just make sure they're as low as they can be. Try and get that down on the lowest position. That one's just coming up. I think that's going to have to do. We just have to get it just so the two are about the same. We're just checking all the threads are okay. We give this a wash out in a moment. And sometimes we get a bolt where someone's hacked it with a spanner in the past. We just clean this up with a file just to tidy it up a little bit. We call this process just dressing up. Don't take too much off because you're going to change the size of the hexagon. So change the spanner size. It's really just getting rid of all the burrs. So that's why we use a fine file. It's really just polishing it up really. Also we grip it on the side so we don't grip the thread in the jaws of the vise. A little tip, if anyone's filed chainsaw chains with a file, they know that you have to support the file with both hands. Doing it like this, you've got no support on the other end. So you use your hand, you put it onto the flat of the bolt, or the nut, whichever you're doing, and just keep it flat so you're stroking it and you're pulling it away. So we do one cut across, and you get that flatness and you just keep in that same position. If you're doing it like this, you're all over the place. If you just support it the other side, you're pushing and you're pulling. It keeps it flat. Don't take too much off, like I said, just quickly go across the top, like that. Pays afterwards, after you just dress it up with a file, just to put it back on the wire wheel. because it will give you a nicer finish. If you look at the difference, you can see it's been filed up. It gives it a dullness. It doesn't look like it's been dressed up so much now, which is better. So we just do each one. Now we have the inspection covers off, so we can locate the push rod into the rocker. The most important thing really is making sure the tubes go up into the rocker box itself. So we've got to pull this gasket back as well. So there's a little bit to think about. Putting on this rocker box, you probably notice I haven't put any oil into the rocker box and the spindle. Reason being is I've got quite a lot to do to locate the push rods onto the rockers and also get the seal into the rocker box. And if I put lots of oil in, it's going to be dripping down all over the gasket. I'd rather get the gasket all sealed up before the oil's contaminating that gasket. Then we can squirt loads of oil in, that's fine. We had a good check anyway, there's no wear and tear in that. I'll bring it back up. So we just hold it with a screwdriver, get it into the cup, like that. It's always a good idea to get all your bolts in before you do anything, because you start pulling down on these bolts before you put these small ones in here, they might be slightly out of line and you can't pick up the thread properly. Always make sure, because there's lots of lateral movement. Okay, so we've put the rocker box bolts back in, but we didn't put anything down, because when you come to get your Allen screws in, you need to manoeuvre the head a little bit, just enough to get it to start on the threads. Okay, so what we're doing now is just gradually pulling down the rocker boxes on these outer bolts, making sure that the seals in the top of the pushrod tubes are not caught up. It's all going down nice and squarely, which that looks okay. We're just going to check, make sure all our rockers are located on the push rods, all that sort of thing first before we do any major torquing down. Once we've got those head bolts down, the rocker box bolts are head bolts as well, then we'll go around and do the Allen screws afterwards and tighten those up. So you need a good torch and keep looking, just make sure nothing's moved out. Okay, one thing we're going to just check is on these rockers we have this swivel ball. It has a flat ground off where you put the feeler gauge in. Now if the swivel ball is in the round position, we won't have the big clearance. So what we're going to do, we're just going to turn this over and make sure we've got clearance like that to start with. If we haven't, it means one ball is turned and we need to get the flat side down onto the valve. Okay. Because we haven't altered the clearances, so there will still be clearance there from when obviously it was up and running before. So that's okay. We can start pulling the head down now. These are set at 18 pounds-feet and we're going to do it at 14 first. Always pays to read your manual to look at your sequence. They do vary. Although we go diagonally on most, this is a little bit different. So we're going to follow this exactly so we get it spot on. Okay, so we come to pull down the head. We're torquing it down to 14 foot-pounds. Now, should have checked this one. A little bit of an issue, but it looked fine. This bolt here, if I put the torque wrench on here, we're not pulling it down. Now what we're going to have to do is take the rocker boxes off, take the head off. And there's like an insert. I'm going to take that out, and if we can do it in situ, we're going to have to tap out into the barrel, oversize, and make a new insert up for it. It is a bit of a problem, but we have got to sort it out. It's one of those things, you know, no one wants this to happen, but it isn't right, so it's got to be sorted. You can't cover it up. So yeah, that was one that was, when we come to take this apart, we found there was one protruded bolt. Hadn't been pulled down, it was this one. That's the reason why. Obviously it worked its way out. At some stage it's probably been over tightened. So yeah, it's a bit of a pain, but you have to do it properly.